Thank you. Thanks to Tom Lux. Thanks to Travis Denton. Thanks to Poetry at Tech. It's a great pleasure to be here and to read with Bruce McEver and Kim Adenizio. I'm going to read mostly from this brand new book that's out. It's 9 days old. But I'm going to start with a poem from the archives, although it actually comes from a book that's only 5 days old. It just happens to be a book that was published only in England. And it deals with that terrible problem. There's a bunch of seats up front. You can kick my crap under the seat there. It's not crap, actually. It's a jacket my mother bought me. This is a poem about that age-old problem of disposing of the carcass of a dead horse. We all go through it at some time or another, I know, but this is the sort of situation wherein, imagine the horse has gone down and you have no heavy equipment. You don't even have a shovel. You live in a very arid place. It would take 12 days to dig a hole with a teaspoon. So what do? Horseflies. After the horse went down, the heat came up, and later that week, the smell of its fester yawed an open mouth of had-been air our local world was licked inside of. And I, the boy who'd volunteered at twilight, shunts of chawed cardboard wadded up my nostrils, and a dampened bandana over my nose and mouth. I strode then into the ever-purpler sink of rankness and smut, a sloshful 5-gallon bucket of kerosene in my right hand, a railroad fusee in my left, and it came over me like water then. Into my head gaps and gum rinds, into the tear ducts and taste buds, and even into the last dark tendrils of my howling, agonized hair that through the windless half-light hoped to fly from my very head and would have, I have no doubt, had not the first splash of kerosene launched a seething skin of flies into the air and onto me. The cloud of them so dense and dark, my mother in the distance saw smoke and believed, as she had feared I would, that I had set my own fool and staggering self aflame, and therefore she fainted and did not see how the fire kicked the other billion flies airborne exactly in the shape of the horse itself, which rose for a brief, quivering instant under me, and which for a pulse thump at least I rode, in a livery of iridescence, in a mail of exoskeletal facets, wielding a lance of swimming lace, just as night rode the light and the bones and the sweet cleansing smoke to the ground. I promise you there will be no other dead animal poems, but I actually write quite a few of them. This book is called Anatomy of Melancholy and Other Poems. It's a great title. I stole it. The original Anatomy of Melancholy was written by one Robert Burton, first published in 1626, a 17th century polymath, trained as a mathematician. The original is 1,500 pages long. It's a tough read, but it's actually a brilliant and amazing and wonderful volume in which he maintains that melancholy, he was depressed, but in which he maintains that melancholy is the condition of mortality. Essentially that if you're not melancholy, you're either stupid or dead. This poem refers to one of my favorite books, if I had to make the Desert Island list. And the Desert Island list consisted of 10 books. This book would be with me. 5, no. But 10 it would. And it's a book called Modern English Usage. Seriously, by H.W. Fowler. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. So I refer to him in this book. I also refer to a contemporary of his, a wonderful 19th century British poet by then a Jesuit priest by the name of Gerard Manley Hopkins, probably in which I refer to what is probably his most famous poem called Pied Beauty, the first line of which is, "Glory be to God for dappled things." Ever since then, nobody's ever used the word dappled in a poem. Till now. First person. One lies on one's back in the woods, savoring the sun. And for some reason, one has opted for what Fowler calls the false first person pronoun, one, that is, instead of the other. One brushes an ant from one's ear. One peers up into the breeze-swayed branches of a ponderosa pine. One among many one has arranged oneself under. Perhaps the wind, which is easy and warm, dislodged the ant one swept from one's ear, meaning it had fallen many times its height to land there in the whirl of the ear of one. In truth, one wishes for the tongue of a sylph instead of an ant. Even two sylphs, one thinks, though perhaps it is not sylphs one means, they being invisible spirits of the air, but rather the slender girls of one's conjuring. One conjures, one admits. Thinking one dead, a deer approaches. One imagines being a deer, but then one rises to a seated position so that the deer will startle and run. If only one could run as a deer does. If one were not so weary, one would that very deer chase a ways, beguiled by the wave of its white tail. But no, one is molten. One seems to have no bones. One shall not run, not now, nor even rise. Instead, one shall subside to one's supine pose, and by the sun, through the needles of the trees, be dappled. Though, of course, one should avoid the word dappled. One knows this, yet something about the sun and the sway of the shadows makes one larcenous as well as slothful. And as one acknowledges one's Hopkinsian trespass, one notes perhaps the same sort of finch spoken of in his poem, and sees one's borrowing as praise of the finch, that is, although it dawns on one that this particular finch is an American goldfinch, and one decides one's praise is for him instead, the poet. One feels literary and elusive then. It seems one's time upon one's back in the woods is not wasted after all. There is the squeegee, 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 squeegee song of the goldfinch. One is delighted by the 19 E's in the preceding line, not one of which has been written. Since one is reclined under the trees with none of the usual writing implements, one counts them in one's head and upon one's fingers instead. One's 1965 Book of the Month Club edition of Fowler's Modern Usage delights one also, though it is a quarter-mile away and stamped with the name and address of a dead woman one knew once. One knew her, and she died, and one is glad to have known her, for she was droll and brilliant, although one wishes one had known her when she was young. Once one was young, but is no longer, though one still conjures as if one were. Sylphs, women, the too soon dead, the chaste and priestly poets of yore. Otherwise, one does not imagine one is certain of much. In fact, one is almost asleep, but then a hawk alights on the limb directly above, a rabbit in its talons. One's breath is held. One perceives the soul of the rabbit does not abide. One dares not move, even though one's face and white t-shirt will soon be dappled with the rabbit's blood. One imagines, one thinks of the one one loves and knows that she will startle to see one's bloody face and shirt. One will stand seemingly wounded and speak to her of wind and sun, the hawk and its prey, the finch and the deer, even fowler, all things whose beauty is past change. And the one one loves will not understand at first when one insists that one must never be the last one to die. This is actually the first stop on what's a long and involved reading tour for me. In a couple of weeks, I'll be in the Midwest, and I'll get to visit my parents, my father. I'll be there for my father's 91st birthday. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's 10 years ago. When they give you the slip that you fill out and say, what disease would you like to have happen to you at the end of your life? Pick VD. I mean, like in your 80s and 90s? Don't pick Parkinson's. The poem's called cenotaph. It's a word that migrated into English from the Greek, chenos meaning empty and taphos meaning tomb. Cenotaph. Never especially inclined mathematically, my father, days past his 80th birthday, calculated the following. If the names of all the dead, military and civilian alike, of every nationality from his war, the good one, were blasted into granite, as were those of only the American soldiers who had perished in the bad one, mine, the resulting monument would be almost a mile long and 100 feet deep. Setting aside the engineering challenges, he believed the greater problem was the names 60 million he ciphered, though I don't know how. His imagined monument, a project no greater than the interstate highway system or the dams across the nation's river, could take decades to erect. No more than Rushmore or Crazy Horse. And yet, who would have envisioned such a task? I remember how, the night of the first moon landing, he stood in his backyard in the heart of the country, straining through binoculars to see what could not be seen but was. Now, 10 years past his monumental calculations, the only numeral that matters to him is 2. We are not sure why. Perhaps because my sister and I are 2, as are he and our mother, her failing eyes and gentle hands. And therefore, 2 is the answer to every problem the young neurologist poses, a physician not much older than my own children, none of whom ever lived through something called the draft. My father does not know what year we are in or the name of our current president. Even the names of his grandchildren are lost to him sometimes. And if we were to ask that name by which he calls himself, we fear that too may be gone. He does not know, and probably never did, the word cenotaph, though the memorial he once imagined would have been just that, an empty tomb. Father, let me estimate the dead for you. It has been and will be everyone. Let us understand that mountains are, like plains and swamps, like rivers and oceans, death and life factories, forges from which come numberless souls, residents on a spinning blue cenotaph that without us has no name nor need of one. These were the dead of a single war, these the dead of the others. And here are those who died, as we say, in peace, some whose lives has faded within them until they are only the names and numbers they had been known by. And here is where they were, beneath a cyclical moon, which bears through the universe some footprints and a flag. Two-poem warning. My old friends tease me that nobody had more interesting summer jobs than I did. This is the title poem of the new book called Anatomy of Melancholy. Lucy Doolin, first day on the job, stroked his goatee and informed the 7 of us in his charge his name was short for Lucifer, and that his father, a man he never knew, had been possessed, as his mother had told him, of both an odd sense of humor and a deep and immitigable bitterness. Also, that the same man had named Lucy's twin brother, born dead, Jesus Christ. These facts, he said, along with his tattoos and mohawked black hair, we should, in our toils on his behalf, remember. As we should also always remember to call him only by that otherwise most womanly diminutive, and never, he warned, by his given nor surname, least of all with the title Mr. attached, which would remind him of that same most hated father, and plunge him therefore into a mood he could not promise he would, he said, behave appropriately within. Fortunately, our job, unlike the social difficulties attached thereto, was simple: collect the trash from the county's back roads. Although, given Lucy's insistence on thoroughness, this meant not only beer cans and bottles, all manner of cast-off paper and plastics, but also the occasional condom too, as well as the festering roadkill, fresh and ridden with maggotry, or desiccate and liftable only from the hot summer tar with a square-bladed shovel, all of which was to be tossed in the back of the township truck we ourselves rode to and from the job in. By 50-yard increments then we traveled. He was never not smoking a cigarette. Late every afternoon at the dump, while we unloaded our tonnage of trash, he sat with Stump McCarriston, sexton of the dump and the dump's constant resident, in the shade next to a green, decrepit trailer we marveled at and strangely envied, since every inch of wall we could see through the open door was plastered with foldouts and pages from every Playboy and nudie magazine he had ever found among the wreckage there. Stump, we understood, was the ugliest man on earth. Even had Lucy not told us so, we would have known by the olfactory rudeness within 20 yards of his hovel that he never bathed. And once, while we shoveled and scraped, he took up the .22 from beside his door and popped with amazing accuracy 3 rats not 50 feet from us, then walked to their carcasses, skinned them out, and hung their hides on a scavenged grocery store rack to dry. He was making, Lucy explained, a rat hide coat we could see come the fall, except for school. As for school, it was a concept Stump could not fathom and Lucy had no use for. On the truck's dash all that summer, Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, a tome he'd said he'd read already 11 times, this summer being the 12th. We thought in some way it might have had to do with something like the gallery Stump's trailer contained, the first word of its title meaning something to us, the last nothing at all. There were things about men we might be unable ever to know, which we somehow knew was lucky. And Lucky, incidentally, was the name of the cat, fat and mangy, that once Stump was back in the shade with Lucy, began one by one to consume the hideless rats. The town we came from was sinking into the emptiness of 1,000 abandoned coal mine shafts beneath it, and rats were more common than hares and universally despised. They shamed us, it seemed, as we were shamed by ignorance and curiosity. The bodies of those women on the walls, the provenance of rats the very earth offered up like a plague, the burden of a name like Lucifer or Stump, whose name, as it was scrawled on his mailbox, seemed to be Stumplin Riley Esquire, McCarriston Esquire. Of the 7 of us, 1 would die in Vietnam. 1, after medical school, would hang himself from a beam in his parents' basement. The others, merely gone, vanished in actuality, if not memory, leaving me alone to tell this story. How Stump would spend his last 20 years in prison, having shot Lucy, one slender, flattening .22 slug through the forehead as he stood 50 feet away, balanced atop the tub of an ancient wringer washer, arms extended like Jesus Christ, said Stump, whose trailer was bulldozed into the dump itself even before the trial, and who, no doubt, by some court-appointed lawyer, if not the appalled sheriff himself, was forced to bathe and shave, to step into the unknown country of a scentless white shirt and black businessman's trousers, in order to offer his only, yet most sincere defense, that Lucifer, Mr. Doolin, as the court insisted, had told him to. Okay, last one. I'd tell you it's on a lighter note, but maybe not. This is a very elusive book. There's a great and wonderful poem called Jubilate Anno by Christopher Smart, 18th century British poet. And one particularly famous part of it is about his cat. For I will consider my cat Jeffrey. And I've always meant to steal that poem. And you can't really steal it because there it is. So this is called For I Will Consider My Cat Lenore. For she has in her 12th year of hunting lost some weight in the summer, despite the daily, even hourly slaughter of everything smaller than she and unable to escape her. For she had for some time, unbeknownst to me, relieved herself on my favorite dress shoes, making them foul and fit only for the fire. For though she be named after the place she was born, as long as such legions as she requires might be dispatched and often devoured in part or whole, she is happy to be here or there, it hardly matters otherwise. For she does not like me, and I know not why, and offer her each morning a tablespoon of cream, which she will deign to lap a bit, then abandon to the dog. For there is her purr in the lap of my daughter, whose cat she was, and there is her purr in the laps of my sons and my friends, though her purr in the lap of he who offers her cream worth never. For the practical worth of her depredations is the ratio by which those preyed upon enter not the house. For the house is in the woods, and the woods are also full of those whose depredations upon her are as avidly sought as hers upon her prey. For she is luckier than her mother and brother, gotten by owl, coyotes, or eagle, or perhaps even one of those of the same order as she, bobcat, lion, or lynx. For she is gray and invisible, it seems. For she cougheth up elaborate balls of her own fur upon the carpet for me. For I have labored to love her, and have accomplished by such labors an understanding, at least, since I have watched her at the hunt and been inspired by the single-mindedness and excellence of her predatory disposition. For I have wondered also what manner of attentiveness of my own I might have brought to bear upon anything that could equal hers, unless it be praise. For the sun and the moon, for the plenitude of mice, and for the still beautiful back of the hummingbird she has left in the ashtray next to the chair on the porch of my shack. For it is a calliope hummingbird smaller than my little finger, and its purple cowl in the time I have attended to this consideration of its killer has, without my notice, faded, and Lenore herself is uncoiled from her chair where she had slept for more than an hour and walked back into the woods, to which I toss the hummingbird's almost weightless body which she left me, so that I might feel exactly the way I do right now. Thank you very much. Thank you.